Hey guys, how you doing today? Doing all right, I hope. Hey, happy birthday. Thank you. I appreciate that. You guys are awesome. All the nice notes that I'm getting today. You guys are awesome. Thank you. Let me see. Robbie. Hey Mega, how are you doing today? No. Hey Daniel, how are you doing? Aman, how are you? Glad to see you guys all here. Yeah, hard to believe we're already into Unit 5 here. Hard to believe. Caden, how are you? Hey Luke, what's going on, man? Glad you could be here. Today is a good day. It is a good day. Hopefully it'll be a better day here if my phone decides to load my stuff that I need it to load up here. It's taking forever. Let me try this. Let me shut that off. Maybe it'll do better. There we go. It's starting to load. Hey, Brendan, what's up? Abby, how are you? So make sure I've hit everyone that's in here so far. Hope everyone is doing great. Joa, I know. Several. We'll just go several today. How about that? Man. I'm surprised you don't ask me like the night before how many slides there's going to be. Hey Jace, how are you doing today? A couple more minutes and then we're going to get started here. I want to get going. Vishnu, yes, it is my birthday today. today. Old, old, old. We never accused you of it being your birthday today, Bhavesh. Okay, let's get started. Let's get going. I know people will come in here in a little bit. Just keep in mind that if you haven't sent me your DBQs yet, make sure you get that taken care of. I'm turning 90. I would like to see what you got so far, and that also goes for kids. Wow, Mega, you were close. 1966. That was awesome. For those of you who are not in my class, whether you're attending, these reviews from Haltom or from Mr. Peterson's class, please send me your DBQs if you have not done so already. So, okay, let's get started. So today we start a new unit. We start what we call Unit 5. And this is, the idea of the Enlightenment. We have the Industrial Revolutions, and we have all sorts of revolutions, going on in this time period. And, we thought we had a lot of change in the last time period. This time period is definitely all about change, okay? Because things do complete reversals. They go a complete 180 here, and they start going all sorts of different ways. And when I say that, we're talking social life, we're talking political, we're talking economical. So a lot of things begin to change. And the first thing we're going to take a look at today is we're going to take a look at political change. And we're going to be dealing with this idea of the Enlightenment, first of all. All right. So this is an age of new ideas. All right. And this grows out of the scientific revolution here. It's an era of what we call humanism. It is the era of the Renaissance, Enlightenment thought, the ideas of individualism, freedom, self-determination, challenging the state, and and the roles of monarchs here. We start to begin to see that. We emphasize human achievement here in understanding natural laws that govern society and political spheres. Traditional religion does not disappear, but it becomes less pervasive here. It just basically means that religion doesn't have the overriding influence when it comes to political and social life that it once did. All right. So we're going to take a look at this, what we call the age of new ideas, the age of isms, ISMS, the age of isms here. New ideas emerge on how to improve society. New ideas emerge on how to improve politics and government. We get things like socialism and liberalism. And then, of course, on the other side of that, we have the thing called conservatism, which is what it says here in the screen, the old regime based on privilege. All right, so we see liberalism and socialism fighting against conservatism, and that is something that still goes on today, of course. And of course, this clash would lead to revolutions, and these revolutions have a couple of different aims. One is independence from imperial powers, like we see with the United States or the colonies before we become the United States with England, and the idea of constitutional representation, that everybody should be treated fairly, with the law. The idea of nationalism begins to grow. That feeling of intense loyalty to others who share your culture and who share your language. And they say, hey, we should live in an independent nation. We shouldn't have to rely or be dependent on somebody else here. And then these ideas of multi-independent nation states begin to threaten to destroy Europe's multi-ethnic empires, because these ethnicities are finally starting to come out on their own and say, hey, we should have a nation of our own. And this takes place with new ideas and things of that nature. And where does it come from? Well, one of the first places that this idea of the Enlightenment comes from, it comes from the scientific revolution, all right? Francis Bacon. Yeah, Bacon. We all love Bacon. he came up with the scientific method, the thing that you guys use in biology and chemistry and whatever other math or science classes that you're taking. It is the method of empiricism, a belief that knowledge comes from sensed experience, from what you observe and experimentation, rather than relying on religious beliefs. And that's what this idea of empiricism is. All right? And Thomas Hobbes, he argues here to the left that people should give up certain rights to a strong central government to protect them. They want law and order, and he writes this book called The Leviathan, and if the government, if the people get out of hand, this Leviathan, this underwater creature would come up and swallow them whole. That's what a government should be about. And then on the other side, John Locke argues that it is the responsibility of the people to revolt against an unjust government. People have rights of life, liberty, and then, of course, property. And we understand these things because it's written in our Constitution, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness here. And his emphasis is that the environment and education shape people's lives, and that it was very radical for that time because a lot of people were not educated, and it was the church that shaped people's lives. All right, and these are just some of the people that we're going to be talking about here, and I'm going to talk about briefly. I'm not going to go in depth on each one of these guys, but these are what we call the philosophes, or the philosophers of 18th century time period. They are thinkers, they are writers, they explore the social, political, and economic theories in different ways here. Along with many French thinkers, we have a couple of American thinkers here. Of course, you have Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, and then a guy by the name of Adam Smith. They write and they think about how rational thought correlates with social and political thought. We have Baron Montesquieu here. He says we need to separate the powers of government. We need to have checks and balances here. Voltaire, separation of church and state. Religion should not have any impact on the political life or how laws are applied to people. And then you have Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau here. The idea of the social contract, that it's an agreement between the people and the government. If the people don't have faith in their government, they can go to the polls during election time and vote them out. That's how the people can control their government. And of course, all of these influences of all six or all five of these guys are what's going to influence the writing of the American Constitution and, of course, the Declaration of Independence first, of course. Okay, so let's talk about Adam Smith here, because Adam Smith deals with economics, okay? He's the guy that wrote The Wealth of Nations. He might be considered what we would consider the father of capitalism here. And he responds to mercantilism. He doesn't like the idea of mercantilism or mercantilism, however you pronounce it here. He says we need freer trade. The government must keep their hands off. And as we remember about mercantilism, man, it was all about the government getting their fair share here. They controlled trade. And Adam Smith says, no, we need to stop that. We must have this invisible hand. The government can regulate to a degree, but for the most part, they need to stay out of it. And he believes that if consumers and businesses were allowed to make their own decisions and choices economically with little intervention of the government, the choices they would make would be very beneficial for society. So again, this is the foundation of capitalism. It's an economic system where production is privately owned and it is definitely for profit. And this is, the type of economic system we live in today. All right. So moving out of the political realm, let's move into thought, maybe a little bit of religion here. And one of the first things that comes up is the idea of deism here. A divine entity put natural laws in motion, all right? But this divine entity does not interfere with the day-to-day workings of these laws. And that is different than what we thought before then of what God would do. All right. God puts them in place, and then he just lets them play out. That is what deism is. They also believed that attending church or practicing a religion was a social obligation, that all should do it because it helps with the morality of society. It's not necessarily a need to do it, because if you don't go, you're going to go to hell. That's not what they thought. They said, if you go to church, if you practice a religion, then things in the future will be much better for society. So they saw it as an obligation to society. All right. In the Americas and in Europe, thinkers begin to react to the social ills or the social problems of society. And some of those social problems were urbanization, the growth of cities really, really fast due to the Industrial Revolution, and we're going to get into that here shortly. Poverty, fixing the infrastructure. Many wanted more government interaction here. Traditional ideas and traditional institutions placed the blame on the poor themselves. They said, we are in this dire straits because of the poor. They're not doing their part, and they called on them to change. All right. And that is conservative thought. Conservative is the belief in these traditional institutions and the traditional ideas. They favored a reliance on practical experience over ideological theories. All right. They said it's up to the people that are most affected by this to fix it. All right. Now that is completely different than what we see from, some of these other thinkers, and what we're talking about here is socialism here, which is an economic and political theory that refers to a system of public or direct worker ownership of the means of production. And of course, that is the ideas of Karl Marx. And under socialism, various types of socialism emerge, all right? You get utopian socialism, and you get, thinkers like Henri Saint-Simon and Robert Owen and Charles Fourier and all these guys. They all proposed how labor and factory owners and government should all work together to make society a much better place, giving people education, harmonious living communities, communal ownership of property, community rules to govern work, education, and leisure time here. All right. Classical liberalism is a belief that natural rights, constitutional government, laissez-faire economics, and reduce spending on armies and establish churches. These are things that need to happen under a classical liberalism type of atmosphere here. And they backed several reform bills which would broaden male suffrage or male voting rights here. So liberalism wants to get more people involved. Liberalism wants to get the government more involved in fixing the ills of society. Now, conservatism on the other side is I'm not going to say it's laid back, but it relies on the people themselves. Oh, you got a problem? Fix it yourself. I'm not here to fix your problems. All right, so other ideas that come out of this time period, we have feminism, of course. We see the emergence of women and a movement for their rights and equality. And of course, we don't see that happen very fast. We don't see a lot of women's equality really take place till the 20th century. But one of the first people that really begin to push for it is this lady right here of Mary Wollstonecraft. She argues that women should receive the same education as men. Women should be given a universal education in hopes of being able to support themselves instead of relying on men. And eventually they would argue for full women's suffrage. And women's suffrage means the right for women to vote. And that would happen by 1928 all across the world. And then we have another age of new ideas is abolitionism. Basically, what abolitionism is, restrict, stop, prohibit the slave trade and anything that is associated with it. Free slaves across the world. Slave trade was banned before slavery itself, okay? Denmark and England, the United States stopped the slave trade by 1808. That doesn't mean you couldn't own slaves. It just means the trading of slaves had stopped, okay? And they thought that if you banned the slave trade, the number of slaves would eventually decline, and that was true for most countries. But in the United States, it wasn't. All right. The United States slave population continued to increase. Remember, the United States in the South, in the United States, weren't bad living conditions. When I say bad living conditions, I mean climate-wise, disease-wise. You could raise a family, and you could continue on, even though your living conditions, where you lived or how your owner treated you was still very, very harsh. But you could grow a family in these situations, and that's what happened in the United States. And then the United States finally banned slavery, the whole thing, the trade and the owning of people, in 1865 after the Civil War, of course. And then the last country to ban slavery totally was Brazil in 1888. All right. Serfdom is also going to come to an end in Europe. Russia was the last in 1861 when they released their 23 million serfs that were still employed in that type of coercive labor system. And then you have Zionism, okay? The idea of what Zionism is, it is the Jews wanting to establish an independent homeland. This emerges in the late 19th century here. And of course, after centuries of battling anti-Semitism all across the world, they faced many obstacles. And they wanted to find their own homeland in Palestine. And of course, that was all a part of the Ottoman Empire. And of course, it wasn't just open and free land. The Palestinians lived on it. What are you going to do? And then eventually by 1948, this Zionist movement continued to grow and grow and grow. And then you have World War II. So that pushes the rest of the world saying, yeah, they need to have their own land. And in 1948, they found the modern day country of Israel. And of course, that doesn't come without its problems either, because they went into an area of land that was already being occupied by somebody. So what do? Well, you push them off the land and you create your own country. That's why we still have, several problems in that area of the world today. All right, so that brings us to the end of the Enlightenment. Remember, the Enlightenment is about how intellectual and ideological thinking affected reform and revolution after 1750. And Joa, just so you know, this was the longest PowerPoint. The next two aren't quite as long. So I'm going to kind of give you a break. I'm going to see if there's any questions here, and then we'll go from there. All right? Thanks. You don't look over 40. Why, thanks, Luke. I appreciate that. Yes, I wish I was turning 23. That would be so great. The Enlightenment really only happened in Europe and the Americas. Yeah, for the most part. Now, I'm not going to say that the Enlightenment stopped there. When we get into the revolutions of Latin America, they use Enlightenment ideas, okay? Because, the Haitian Revolution is definitely based on Enlightenment ideas. So just saying that it happened in the Americas and Europe only, that wouldn't be true. Now, did the Enlightenment ideas happen in China? Not so much. All right. So, okay. So moving on here. Well, first of all, I've got to pull up my notes on my phone here. Nationalism and revolutions. Hopefully it'll pull up on my phone fast here, which doesn't look like it's going to. All right, here we go. All right, so let's take a look at this. Now, the Enlightenment leads to what these ideas of nationalism and revolutions here. So what were the causes and the effects of various revolutions in this period from 1750 to 1900, and including the influence of the Enlightenment and emerging nationalism here. And we're going to be talking about, 3 or 4 different types of revolutions here that happened because of the Enlightenment. And of course, the first thing that we have to talk about is the American Revolution. That was definitely a revolution that dealt with Enlightenment ideas here. The American colonists had become increasingly independent from England. Colonial legislatures had been making their own decisions without the help of Parliament in England, so they had a history of being able to do these things on their own. And then due to the 7 Years' War, or the French Indian War, the English started to tax the American colonists more so than they ever had before. They started putting a more heavier hand from the monarch into the colonies, saying, hey, you know what? We won this war. You guys have to help us pay for this war. So they started taxing the colonists to pay for it. And of course, this led the elite in the colonies to start a movement towards independence. They're basically saying, hey, stop. What are you doing for us? We've been running these colonies successfully on our own for decades, and now all of a sudden you're coming in and telling us what to do. No, we do not want this. All right? They wanted to maintain the status quo in the colonies themselves. And then, of course, by 1776, you get the ideas of the Enlightenment thinkers and Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. And the one thing I want you to keep a reminder of about the American Revolution, was it a revolution? To a degree, it changed the way we approach government. The Constitution, separation of church and state, separation of powers. Yes, that was very revolutionary at that time. Okay, it was a people by the people for the people, or it was a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Okay, so that was very revolutionary at the time. But the one thing that was not revolutionary here. Slaves were not set free, even though we said that all men are created equal. Slaves are not set free. Women still don't get a whole heck of a lot of rights, even though they said all men are created equal. Not every man gets to vote, because if you don't own land, you can't vote. You don't have a say. So the people that were in power in the colonies themselves before the revolution, guess what? They're still in power. All right, so the revolution really is not revolutionary in society, in social life. It is huge politically, but economically it's not a huge revolution. Socially and culturally, it's not a huge a revolution. Either. The people who are in power stay in power in the American colonies. All right. Let's take a quick look at the French Revolution as well. All right, so just real quick, little historical context on the French Revolution, or in France at this time in the 18th century. You have the 3 estates, of course. You have the first estate and the second estate, which are consisting of the clergy and the nobility, about 3% of the population. And then the poorest estate, the third estate, which, 97% of the population here. And of course, they're broke. They have economic problems due to the 7 Years' War that they lost to the English. So they, again, need to raise money. So the king decides, hey, who has the money? Let's raise the money on the nobility. The nobility says, heck no, you can't do this to us. And they refuse it. And they broke away. And then, of course, they say, well, we need to put it to a vote in the Estates General. And the third estate always knows that the first estate is going to vote against whatever they want to do, and it's always going to pass 2 votes to 1 vote. So the third estate, the poor, the bourgeoisie, the people that were not nobility and clergy say, hey, we're going to break off, and we're going to form a new body called the National Assembly. Maybe a constitutional monarchy is on the way, because remember, in France, it's an absolutist monarchy at the time under Louis XVI here. So the king refuses. He says, no, we're not going to have this constitutional monarchy. That's just plain crazy. And this would lead to the crowds storming the Bastille. The common people stormed the Bastille on July 14th, 1781. Now, why the Bastille? What is this? The Bastille was just a big prison, okay? But it was a symbol of the abuses, the corruption of the monarchy. You know, people were imprisoned for no good reason a lot of times. So the peasants, they march into the countryside here, and they start to burn down the houses of the nobles. The king was forced to accept this new government, and then, of course, the National Assembly was formed. But this, you know, it really doesn't last that long, of course. The National Assembly adopts what is called the Declaration of the Rights of Man, basically declaring basic human rights for man. And of course, the monarchy and the nobility refused this here. They didn't like the idea of a limited monarch. And then this would lead to the dissatisfaction of radical groups such as the Jacobins. And this would lead to the idea of what the Reign of Terror is here. In this period, the government, which was under control of the Jacobins, would guillotine thousands of people who opposed the revolution. And of course, King Louis King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette opposed this revolution, and they were executed. They were guillotined, on things like this here. So after this period of terror, about 1804, a guy rides in on his horse and the army by the name of Napoleon. And then, of course, Napoleon would come in and institute an empire. He would be an emperor, which is very much like an absolute monarchy, all right? So we go from an absolutist monarchy, and we go through a period of terror and National Assembly and things like that, and, try to get a constitutional monarchy. But by the end of the revolution in 1804, we end up being back under an emperor, someone that's like a dictator, another absolute monarch here. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind is we compare these two revolutions, the American Revolution and the French Revolution. The American Revolution was a top-down revolution. It was run by the elites. Now, and it was looking to completely change, getting rid of the government and becoming a country on their own, becoming independent, okay? In France, it was different because it was bottom-up. It was led by the poor. All right. They weren't looking to become independent. They were just looking to say, hey, I just want rights here. We need to change the government a little bit here so we have our rights, so you can't tax us type of thing. All right. So these two revolutions still based on Enlightenment ideas, but they were very different in who ran them. And of course, they were very different on, the outcome here. And then we have the Haitian Revolution here. And again, this is all based on the ideas of the Enlightenment. Slaves in Haiti, right over here, revolted against their master in the French coffee and sugar colonies of Haiti. And this revolution was joined by escaped slaves who were living in those maroon communities in Jamaica or in Haiti at the time. And a former slave by the name of Toussaint L'Ouverture, you like that? Gained his inspiration from the American and the French Revolution. He says, look, they can do it. We can do it as well. And he led his army to several victories and eventual independence by 1801 here. All right, he produced a constitution that granted equality and citizenship to all citizens of Haiti. He enacted land reform. Plantations were divided up and land was distributed to former slaves and free black people. And then by 1804, Haiti was recognized as the first Latin American country to gain full independence from a colonizer and the first black-led country in the Western Hemisphere. So Haiti has a couple of, distinctions there. Okay, it was run by the revolution was run by former slaves and slaves themselves. And again, when it was all said and done by 1804, it is the first black-led country in the Western Hemisphere. Okay, and with all this, we get to begin to see Creole revolutions in Latin America as well. Remember, the Creoles are those born in America of European parents, okay? And they're well educated, and they're aware of the revolutions in North America and in France and in, Haiti itself. And they consider themselves superior to the rest of the Latin American society. And of course they would, okay? Take a look at it. We're all white here, we're all European here, and by the time we move down in this social class here, we starting to see a mixture. So it is logical that this group of people here would think of themselves as superior. Now, why are they ticked off? All right, why are they discontent with everything? Well, Creoles, who were wealthy owners of the state's mines or businesses, they opposed Spanish mercantilism. They wanted them things for themselves. They did not like giving what they made back to Spain, of course. So Creoles wanted more political power. They wanted more economic power. And the Spanish tended to give important jobs to this group of people here. And then, of course, the mestizos here, they also want some sort of representation. They want some political power, and they want a share of the wealth as well. All right. Now, this is Simon Bolivar here. He fearing the masses that the Creoles refused the support of the lower classes, they saw the result of the Haitians' uprising of slaves and the reign of terror in France. And they definitely don't want that to happen in Latin America, but they still push for Enlightenment ideas. And Bolivar here is one of those guys that push for Enlightenment ideas. He was born in Venezuela in 1783 to a wealthy family, so he's not like he's poor or anything. He establishes what is called Grand Colombia here. He wanted a federation of states like the United States of America. Now, what are some of the effects of these Creole revolutions? Well, you get the rise of strong generals here, caudillos. They gain regional power bases here. Many times they disregard representative forms of government and the rule of law, and they become very dictatorship-ish, that type of thing. Some constitutions ended up, some were ended, some social distinctions. They abolished slavery in some aspects, but governments remained mostly conservative, and the elite remained in power. Now, in Peru, for instance, those who could not read or write in Spanish in Peru, if you couldn't read or write in Spanish, you couldn't vote, okay? Women could not vote. Women could not enter into contracts. They received very little education until the late 19th century, and they remained submissive to men. So in some aspects of these Creole revolutions, even though they got rid of their Spanish overlords, they didn't do a whole lot about social or reforming social life, okay? Now, more challenges to Spanish colonialism. The Spaniards, they begin to lose their grip on their holdings in Latin America and the Caribbean in the late 19th century. And another area that they begin to lose their grip on is Puerto Rico and in Cuba. They were the last Spanish holdings in the Caribbean area. Now, this lady here, her name is Lola Rodriguez del Tio. She is a poet, and she criticized Spain's expletive rule over Puerto Rico and in her poems. And so her home became the place where other revolutionaries came to visit. And political thinking, she said, "Awake from your sleep, for it is time to fight." And she's trying to call her fellow Puerto Ricans to rise up against the Spaniards. And then, of course, she is forced into exile. She's forced to live somewhere else, and she goes to Venezuela and then Cuba. And then by 1899, right at the turn of the 20th century, Puerto Rico is able to gain political independence. So we see all these people that have Enlightenment ideas begin to rise up against their colonial powers. Now, nationalism begins to rise. All right. It's this idea that people feel a common bond with others due to their language, due to their shared history, and due to their customs. That's what nationalism is. We see that in France and America. And nationalism is a unifying force that threatens these larger empires. And one of the larger empires that it's going to eventually threat, of course, is the Holy Roman Empire here. And in one of the first places that takes place in is here in Italy. All right. Italy had been fragmented. Okay. It had been a patchwork of kingdoms and city-states. And you have a guy over here, this guy right here, his name is Count de Cavour. He believed in natural rights, progress, and a constitutional monarchy, but also the ideas of realpolitik. And the ideas of the realpolitik is practical politics of reality. Do what you need to get things done politically for the betterment of your country and your people. And he gets the support of, he gets the support of Giuseppe Garibaldi and his Red Shirts military, and they're able to gain and create what is now present-day Italy in 1861. And of course, unification doesn't solve all their problems for Italy. Poverty still was a huge problem in Italy at the time, and with the huge problem of that, you get a large amount of people migrating to the United States and to Argentina because of that poverty. So unification does not necessarily fix everything. Okay, German unification is next. All right. So following the Congress of Vienna, which ends the Napoleonic Wars in 1815, there was a number of European states that experienced revolutions. And that, of course, includes Prussia and Austria. And Prussia is basically present-day Germany. All right. The revolutions of 1848 were the result of nationalism, the desire for independence, and liberalism, a desire for representation, and under a constitution that recognized civil liberties. They says, hey, we want our natural rights. Okay, Otto von Bismarck here favor the idea of realpolitik. Do whatever it takes to get her done, as the thought bubble says there. And he was able to found the new German Empire in 1871, and he was able to get new territories gained from several different wars that he had in this area. So we start to see this movement towards unification of states in Europe. And another area where we start to see nationalism and unification and an empire falling apart, of course, is the Ottoman Empire. Greece gains its independence. Serbia and Bulgaria and Romania gain their independence, breaking away from the Ottoman Empire. So this is the weakening of the Ottoman Empire, and it leads to greater influx and new ideas into this empire. And the Ottomans try to raise this idea of what is called Ottomanism, the idea to create a more unified, a more modern state, wanted to minimize the ethnic, linguistic, and religious differences across the empire, but it just creates more suspicion, and they can't do it. So they eventually will basically lose all of their territory, and then by the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire will disappear here. So nationalism, revolutions all take place because of Enlightenment ideas here. Okay, so one more to go here, and I should have you out of here in about the next 10 minutes, and then we'll go from there. So let's take a break, and we'll go from there. 'Twas a Lie. That was shorter, less slides, but A little bit more information there. Sorry, guys. Now, I promise you, this one is a lot shorter here. Look, Joa, it's only 6 slides long. You'll like that. Okay, let's get going. Then we'll get you out of here. So we're going to take a look at the Industrial Revolution, and I don't think I'm going to have to spend a lot of time with this. I think most of you guys know this information. Running out of room on your paper, Joa, there is a fix for that. Get another sheet of paper, all right? What factors contribute and characterize industrialization in the period from 1750 to 1900? And of course, we see new industrial technology, mass production, and of course this mass production is going to lead to consumerism and labor unions and mass equipment being built for militaries, and it completely transforms society and social life here. So during this time, we see agricultural improvements as well. In the early 1700s, some agriculture began to increase productivity due to several things. You have crop rotation, of course, the 3-field system, which helps. The seed drill, which you see over there to your left. The introduction of the potato contributes to more calories to the diet, especially in Europe. So as nations begin to industrialize, their populations grow because of more food being available. Medical care improves during this time. Infant mortality decreases. And people begin to live longer in some classes of society. I'm not going to say every class of society experienced that, but more people do become available to work because of the new food products that are now available due to, the Columbian Exchange. All right, so before the Industrial Revolution, most of the British lived in a small farming village of no more than 300 people. Remember the simulation we did about the Industrial Revolution. What did it begin? The tallest building, the tallest building in these villages of 300 or so people was the church. Okay, and we have what is called the cottage industry. Manufactured products in the home. Women would weave cloth in the home. A very slow process here. The men worked out in the fields and on the farm, and many times a lot of your farm animals lived underneath you in your house. Okay, so women tended to do domestic chores, and the men worked outside of the home on the farm. That's what life looked like before the Industrial Revolution. So during this time period, after 1750, technology just leaps, or the growth of technology leaps and increases. You get what is called the spinning jenny right over here, allowed for more than one thread to be spun at a time. Okay, when women did it, when we take a look back on this slide here, you could only spin one thread at a time. This allows for more of it. You can see different threads being spinned along this spinning jenny here. The water frame, that's what is this right here, becomes more efficient. This mechanization dooms the cottage industry. Richard Arkwright is the creator of the water frame here. He becomes known as the factory system because now we're using the power of water to spin all of these spinning jennies. And textile production in Europe, in the United States, goes through the roof here. And then, of course, you have the idea of interchangeable parts. Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney might be very, very familiar to you because he is the creator of the cotton gin, but he also creates what is called interchangeable parts in 1798. And it was basically at first for military, for making guns and weapons. You can easily replace a damaged piece if you have interchangeable parts. So manufacturers begin to implement this idea in other areas other than weapons. All right, and this leads to the division of labor. Now manufacturers can hire unskilled workers at a much lower price or a much lower wage than they can hire the skilled worker here. All right, and we get instead of specialization of labor, you get people that can specialize in one type of work. These ladies here do the same job over and over and over for hours on end during a week. And then this idea of interchangeable parts will lead to, Henry Ford and the American auto industry, and he creates what is called the assembly line. Okay, so why is it that Britain is able to do this first? Okay, why Britain? It has mineral resources, of course. It has coal. All right, coal will become the main player here in running the factories. It also has resources from the colonies, cotton, timber, from the Americas, from India. They can get a hold of raw materials to start making their textiles. They have excess capital. They have money, basically, to do this. They have a lot of rivers, abundant rivers here. They have a very strong navy, which can get products to and from wherever they need to go. They protect private property. Owners of factories needed assurances once their business was successful, they would not be taken away by the government. All right. So once those assurances are in place, you see the growth of these industries happening in Great Britain. And England was the first one to really implement these laws here. You have the enclosure movement. Remember, the commons land was that idea of where poor farmers who didn't own any land could graze their cattle for free. Well, under the Enclosure Act, that took away that. They took away that land to build more factories. So a lot of these landless farmers have to stop farming and become workers in the factories later on. So, of course, this idea of the enclosure movement hurts poor farmers here. So you're going to see this growing population of people, this growing pool of workers. And two cities that it really affected were Manchester and Liverpool in England. So those are basically the quick factors. What contributes and characterizes industrialization in this period from 1750 to 1900. All right, that's all I got for you guys today. I know it's been kind of a long week. On Monday, I'm going to do a Zoom again with writing, so be prepared. It'll be a totally different DBQ. A lot of you guys have requested that, to have more DBQ writing, and I'm fine with that, as long as you give me 100% effort and you only take about 45 minutes to do it in. All right, you guys, take care. Peace out. Be safe. Be sane. Have a great weekend. Love ya and miss all of you.